Imagine, you meet someone new. They're charming, intelligent, maybe even magnetic. But as you get closer, you notice something strange. They have no friends, none. No childhood buddies. No college roommates they stayed in touch with. No work friends. Nobody. When you ask about it, they give you some philosophical answer about how people are disappointing or friendships are overrated. They might even make you feel special, like you're the exception. But here's what they won't tell you. You're not the exception. You're next in line to be discarded. Let's start with the most obvious red flag. The trail of destroyed relationships. Everyone has lost touch with people. Life happens. People move. Priorities change. Jobs relocate us. Circumstances shift our social circles. That's completely normal and part of the human experience. But when someone has systematically cut off every single person who ever mattered to them, that's not bad luck. That's a pattern worth examining closely. Ask them about old friends and watch what happens. You'll see a fascinating performance unfold before your eyes. They'll blame everyone else with remarkable consistency. There's always the friend who betrayed them over something minor. The group that didn't understand their unique perspective. The person who wasn't loyal during a difficult time. The colleague who turned out to be fake. Notice a theme developing here? It's never their fault. It's always the other person's character flaw, the other person's failure, the other person's inadequacy. Here's the reality that cuts through all the justifications. If someone has left a wake of burned bridges behind them, stretching back years or even decades, they're the common denominator in every single failed relationship. One failed friendship? That's unfortunate but understandable. 3 or 4? That's still within the realm of bad timing or incompatibility. But 5, 10, 15, 20 destroyed relationships? That's not a coincidence. That's a character issue that runs deep. These individuals don't just drift apart from people naturally over time. They actively incinerate relationships with a scorched earth policy. And they'll do it with pride, convincing themselves, and anyone who'll listen, that they're better off alone, that they've simply outgrown people, that they've evolved beyond the need for such trivial connections. The real danger here is that they're rehearsing the same script they'll eventually use on you, perfecting the narrative that paints them as the victim and everyone else as the villain. Now here's where it gets deeply psychological and much more concerning. Avoidant loners don't just avoid friendships randomly or because of mere preference. They're running from intimacy itself, and not just romantic intimacy, but all forms of genuine human connection. They've built fortress walls around their emotions, constructed layer upon layer of defense mechanisms, and anyone who tries to get close, anyone who attempts to form a real bond, gets labeled as needy, clingy, too much, or emotionally demanding. But here's the twisted part that makes this pattern particularly damaging. They'll still use you for exactly what they need in the moment. They'll seek out your attention when they're bored and need entertainment. They'll fish for your validation when their self-esteem is running low. They'll want your company when loneliness hits too hard at 3 in the morning. They'll take your emotional labor, your time, your energy, your care. The moment you need something back, though, suddenly everything changes. Suddenly you're asking too much. You're being dramatic about reasonable expectations. You're expecting things they never promised, even though those things are basic friendship requirements. This is textbook emotional unavailability, and it's not accidental. It's a carefully maintained system. They want all the benefits of connection, all the comfort and support that comes from having someone care about them, without any of the responsibility of reciprocity, without having to show up when it's inconvenient, without having to be vulnerable or accountable. They've convinced themselves that staying closed off makes them strong, that emotional distance equals independence, that never needing anyone is a badge of honor. In reality, it doesn't make them strong. It makes them emotionally stunted and developmentally arrested. They're not evolved beyond the need for connection. They're stuck in a pattern where vulnerability equals danger, where opening up means potential pain, where trusting someone is seen as weakness rather than courage. And the cruelest part of this dynamic is that they'll make you feel wrong for wanting basic human connection, for expecting reciprocity, for needing the relationship to flow both ways. Listen carefully to how they talk about other people, because the language they use reveals everything about their internal world. Avoidant loners who keep no friends often have a superiority complex that's breathtaking in its scope, a grandiosity that would make even narcissists take notice. They don't just prefer being alone or enjoy solitude. They genuinely believe they're better, more enlightened, more evolved than people who need or maintain friendships. They look down on social connection as weakness, as something lesser beings require. They mock people who maintain friendships as dependent, or desperate, or unable to be alone with their own thoughts. The phrases they use are remarkably consistent across this personality type. I don't need validation from anyone like most people do. Or most people are shallow and boring, which is why I avoid them. Or, I'm just more evolved than that. I've transcended the need for external relationships. Or, friendships are for people who can't handle being alone, who need constant reassurance. But strip away the philosophical packaging, remove the pseudo-intellectual justifications, and you'll find something much sadder underneath. Deep, profound insecurity that's never been addressed. Their independence isn't strength. It's armor they've welded onto themselves to avoid being hurt. They reject others before others can reject them, striking first in a war only they're fighting. They dismiss connection because deep down, they're terrified they're not worthy of it, that if people truly knew them, they'd leave anyway. And this superiority complex serves a very specific psychological purpose. It protects their fragile ego from the truth. If everyone else is beneath them, if other people are just too simple or shallow to understand their complexity, then they never have to face the real reason they're alone. That maintaining relationships requires humility, consistent effort, emotional maturity, self-reflection, and the ability to admit fault, all things they fundamentally lack. The superiority is a shield, nothing more, and it's keeping them trapped in a prison of their own making, while they convince themselves they've chosen freedom. Here's a guaranteed test that reveals everything. Watch what happens when there's any kind of conflict, even minor disagreement. Healthy, emotionally mature people can navigate disagreements without the relationship imploding. They can apologize when they're wrong. They can compromise and find middle ground. They can reflect honestly on their own behavior and make genuine changes when needed. They can sit in discomfort long enough to work through issues. Avoidant loners who keep no friends operate completely differently. They'll disappear the absolute moment things get even slightly uncomfortable. Had a disagreement about something small? You're ghosted, blocked on all platforms, erased from their life. Called them out on problematic behavior with evidence and care? They're suddenly done with the drama, and you'll never hear from them again. Ask them to be accountable for something they said or did. The relationship is over. Finito. And you're now added to their long list of people who wronged them. They don't resolve conflicts through communication. They erase people like deleting files from a computer. This is precisely why they have no long-term relationships of any kind. Friendships, real ones that last, require maintenance and attention. They require showing up when it's hard, not just when it's fun. They require saying, I was wrong sometimes, admitting mistakes, owning your part in misunderstandings. These individuals would rather burn everything down, salt the earth, and walk away than admit fault in even the smallest matter. They would rather be completely alone than be humble for 5 minutes. And here's the kicker that makes this particularly insidious. They'll frame this pattern as having healthy boundaries, or protecting their peace, or not tolerating disrespect. They've co-opted the language of mental health and self-care to justify what's actually emotional cowardice. But real boundaries aren't about running from accountability. They're about communicating needs and limits while staying in relationship. Peace isn't about avoiding all discomfort. It's about having the internal stability to handle conflict maturely. What they're actually doing is using boundary-setting language as a sophisticated justification for their inability to handle the normal ups and downs of human relationships. Let's talk about something practical that often gets overlooked: social proof, and why its absence should concern you deeply. When you meet someone new in normal circumstances, there's usually some evidence of their character available for examination. You might have mutual friends who can share their experiences. There are stories about shared experiences you can verify. Other people exist who can vouch for them, who've known them in different contexts, who can confirm or deny the image they're presenting. You have data points to triangulate who this person actually is. Avoidant loners with no friends offer you absolutely nothing in this department. No one to vouch for their character or contradict their self-presentation. No shared connections who can say, "Oh yeah, I've known them for years. They're solid," or "Actually, be careful there." No history you can verify through independent sources. You're operating on complete blind faith, taking everything they tell you about themselves at face value, with zero ability to confirm any of it. And this should genuinely concern you, because people are known by the company they keep. It's an old saying that exists for good reason. When someone keeps no company whatsoever, when they've systematically removed every witness to their past behavior, you have no way to gauge who they really are beyond the carefully curated image they present. They control the entire narrative completely. They can be whoever they claim to be, reinvent themselves with each new person, with no one around to contradict the story or provide alternative perspectives. This lack of social proof often means one of two things, both concerning. Either they've alienated everyone who truly knew them over time, meaning their real character, the one that emerges in long-term relationships, is likely deeply problematic, and people consistently choose to exit their life once they see it. Or they've deliberately isolated themselves to maintain complete control over how they're perceived, which suggests a level of manipulation and impression management that should raise every red flag. Either explanation points to someone you should be very cautious about investing in. Proceeding with someone who has zero verifiable relationships is like buying a house with no inspection allowed, no history available, just trusting the seller's word. You might get lucky and everything might be fine. Or you might discover major structural problems, hidden damage, and serious issues when it's far too late to back out without significant cost. Here's the pattern you absolutely need to recognize before you get emotionally invested. Because these individuals don't just avoid friendship randomly. They operate in predictable cycles that repeat with remarkable consistency. Phase 1 is idealization, and it feels incredible while it's happening. You're special, different, not like everyone else they've encountered. They've never connected with anyone like this before, and they'll say it with such conviction you'll believe it. You're the person who finally gets them, who understands their complexity, who sees past their defenses. They'll make you feel chosen, selected, extraordinary. Phase 2 is integration, where things seem genuinely great for a while. They're attentive, interesting, fully present in conversations. They share things that seem deep and vulnerable. You start believing maybe they've just been misunderstood all this time. Maybe everyone else was actually the problem. Maybe you're witnessing someone finally ready to let someone in. Phase 3 arrives with minor conflict, something small and manageable. A misunderstanding that could be cleared up with a simple conversation. A disagreement about something relatively unimportant. A moment where they're mildly inconvenienced or gently called out on something. In healthy relationships, this is where growth happens. Phase 4 is devaluation, and the shift can be shockingly abrupt. Suddenly you're demanding for having basic needs. You're needy for expecting reciprocity. You're too much for wanting what they initially offered freely. Just like everyone else, you've revealed yourself to be disappointing. The very traits they once acclaimed to love, your emotional openness, your willingness to be vulnerable, your investment in the relationship, now irritate them intensely. You've gone from special to suffocating without changing a single thing about yourself. Phase 5 is the discard, where they withdraw emotionally or sometimes physically. They might ghost completely, disappearing without explanation. Or they explicitly end things with the same speech they've given dozens of times before. I'm better off alone. I don't need this kind of stress. I'm protecting my peace. And then the cycle starts over with the next person, who believes they'll be different, who thinks their love or friendship will finally be enough. But you won't be different, because the problem was never with all those other people they've discarded. The problem is the person who's collected a graveyard of dead relationships, who's left a trail of confused and hurt people behind them, and who's learned absolutely nothing from any of it, because they've never once considered that they might be the common factor in all their failed connections.